This next example covers the commitment phase, specifically for ground unit commitment. We're going to talk about aircraft in another tutorial. So, the first part of the commitment phase is in the order of initiative winner for this turn. Players will commit units into play. These are ground units. Now, each unit has on its card a designation of front line or rear line. Now, this is and this designation is right under the title. Now, you have to be mindful of that because the front line is basically the map. But when you're committing units into play, a scenario, setup step, or standard game agreement may result in particular spaces that units can come into play in. So, reinforcement points, reserves entry points is what we call them in the game. Now, we mark those points with these reserves entry point counters. So, for example, space 5 and 7 may be the German entry points, and column 1 may be the U.S. entry point for this particular game. So in that case, U.S. units may be committed here, up to the stacking limit, and German units can come into either of these particular spaces. So it's real simple to do. If you have a hand of units, as you're ready to commit, you're going to decide whether or not you want to commit them. You can commit up to your entire hand, and you're going to have to commit a crewed unit with the appropriate crew. So for example, this tank requires a tank crew, and there's the tank crew. So you cannot commit either one of these cards separately unless you're committing the crew to replace a crewless tank already on the map. Say, for example, the crew was destroyed with a damage effect, and you can bring a tank crew in to replace them. So for example, we're going to go ahead and commit this tank into play as the German player, and this infantry unit into play, this rifle squad. Both of these units are front line, as you can see right under the title, and we have the appropriate crew to bring the tank in, so we're good there. We also have this command card in our hand called Veteran Soldiers. Now if you read it, it says play this card as you commit an infantry unit. This unit receives a bonus 1 to attack with any weapon. Cards like this, Veteran Soldiers, Veteran Crew, played in the commitment phase, have to be played when the unit comes in. So for example, if I want to play this Veteran Soldiers card on my rifle squad, I need to do it now. So let's do that. So the Veteran Soldiers, these Veteran Rifle group, are going to come into play in one of these two zones. Now, I already have a mortar squad occupying space 7. So again, within stacking limits, I have to bring these units in. If it's a particular space, I've got to be mindful to perhaps move the units out of the way to bring new units in. Otherwise, I could only bring one more unit into this space, which I'll do there. So that rifle squad comes into play. That commitment is done. And so for the Panzer IV, I want to bring them into play in the other entry point because, one, it's better access to the enemy targets around this disabled Tiger wreck in the middle of the game. And I've already met my stacking limit at this entry point. So I want to make sure in the next movement phase to move these units out so that I can bring more in. Now, say if I had an artillery piece. Well, an artillery unit that goes into the rear line, those are always committed to the player's rear line, which is off board. So for example, if that were the German player's rear line, I could line up artillery as the German player here. They never move, so we don't need the map grid for it. And they're considered miles back from the front line, which is represented by the map. So that is the commitment for the German player, who again had initiative this turn. That's why he did all of his commitment first. Now the U.S. player will go ahead and commit his units from his hand, if desired. And in this case, the U.S. player has a rifle squad, a hold down card, and a howitzer. So the U.S. player will bring the howitzer in to the rear line with the appropriate artillery crew and just place it in along his rear line setup area right here. And then the rifle squad he can bring in this particular game, we've designated column 1 as the setup zone, into any of these 3 spaces in column 1. Now, why don't we use a reserves entry point counter here? Well, typically when we're marking columns, we just remember, column 1 or column 9. When you're marking particular spaces, I think it's easier to mark that with a counter. So those are optional counters to use, but they're sometimes helpful. So that would end the commitment of ground units for this commitment phase. Now remember this hold down card that I had. I just want to show you something real quick. This is also done in commitment. It says place this card under a tank or tank destroyer of your choice in the commitment phase. Bonus 1 defense. But there's something special about this hold down card and any defensive bonus command cards in general. If I were to place that hold down card on my Sherman tank right here to give him a defensive bonus, and then in a subsequent turn move that tank, the hold down card is cleared. It would go away. It's no longer hold down. Okay, so just keep that in mind. If you place any of these defensive bonus command cards that go in under commitment, and then later move that unit. So for example, field camouflage, hold down, dig in, those cards get cleared away from the unit. So those are some of the commitment phase functions, and in particular committing ground units into play. One other kind of special commitment that I want to mention is if you were to have a frontline fixed gun. So we've talked about rear line artillery, but frontline guns coming into play are a bit different. So you can see this anti-tank gun comes into the front line. Well, how do I commit an anti-tank gun that's an immobile unit into play? Well, the rule is you can commit this anti-tank gun or any fixed frontline gun into play up to 1 space away from any allowed setup zone. So I might place the anti-tank gun here for some cover behind this building. And now that anti-tank gun will not move for the entire game. You can withdraw it with a withdraw command card. You can even abandon that gun. The crew can leave it in a particular phase. But that's just a key point to remember, is that those anti-tank guns and the PaK-40s, the 57s, they don't move during the game. So once you bring them into play, make sure you're bringing them into where you want them to be for the rest of the game. And that is basically it for commitment of ground units. There are a couple special rules you might want to review in the commitment section of the game's rules. And then the next thing we want to talk about that's commitment related is aircraft flight paths. And that video tutorial is pretty cool. I want to show you how aircraft work in the commitment phase and how the players will declare where these aircraft will fly right over the map.